Today is a day of gratitude, a day that we say thanks to our men and women in the armed forces who help make our great country free. Today is Independence Day. It is July 4th, 2017, and I salute you and I thank you for your great service to this country. You make our country great. Now, I also want to share with you some incredible stories of some beautiful people that I've been able to help along the way, and this is my day of gratitude, of saying thanks to those people and for sharing their stories to help you understand how I've been privileged and I've been honored to go ahead and help these injured victims, these injured patients, obtain compensation, obtain money as a form of compensation. So come join me for a moment as I share with you some incredible stories of these wonderful people. I'm Gerry Oginski. I'm a New York medical malpractice and personal injury attorney. And the first person I want to tell you about involved a woman who had a tumor sitting in her head that the doctors and the hospital staff should have recognized, but for a number of different reasons, failed to recognize. And as a result of their failure to recognize the tumor that was sitting right in front of them, she went blind in one eye. So what happened here? This woman was a home health aide, and she was taking her patient in a van to a doctor's office, a doctor's visit. And in the course of going to that doctor's visit, they got into an accident. And ironically, the accident occurred right in front of the hospital emergency room. And they took this patient, they took this injured patient out of the van. They wheeled her right into the emergency room. Now, she'd gotten banged up. There was nothing really visible going on with her. She wasn't drowsy, she didn't lose consciousness, but she definitely hit her head. So they did a workup. They did a CAT scan, and what else did they do? They took x-rays to make sure there were no fractures. Now, before they let her go home, the doctor, the emergency room doctor, said, you know what? We have to read the x-rays and the CAT scan first to make sure everything's okay before we send you home. She had been in the emergency room for hours, getting blood tests done, waiting for other tests to come back, and now the last thing that they were waiting for was the CAT scan results and the x-rays. The emergency room doctor went to radiology, and he personally read the x-rays as being normal, and he personally read the CAT scan as being normal. So then he tells her, go ahead, go home, everything's fine. If you have further problems, just follow up with your primary care doctor. The radiologist read her x-rays and her CAT scan. The x-rays were indeed absolutely normal. He then reads the CAT scan and says, hey, she's got a tumor sitting in her brain. This radiologist sees it there. It's plainly visible. You can't miss it. This thing is so visible on the CAT scan. And he writes in his report, tumor, plainly visible. Patient needs immediate follow-up. And what does he do with that information? He dictates that information into his report, and he never sees it again. He never sees anybody. He never tells anybody. He never picks up the phone to call the emergency room doctor to see if possibly the patient is still in the emergency room. He never tracks the patient down. He never asks anybody, hey, by the way, this patient has a problem. Do you know where she is? No. Did you call her at home? No. What did he do with that information? He correctly diagnosed the problem, but he didn't tell anybody about it. So what happened to that report, that radiology report? It got put into the patient's file, and no one ever looked at it again. Now, months go by, and over the next 4, 5, 6, 7 months, the patient began to notice a blurring in her eye, a blurriness. She'd never had it before, and she didn't think much of it, until it got so bad it's now about 9 months later, after this original car accident. And now she's having difficulty seeing out of that eye. She finally goes to an eye doctor who says, you know what, let's go get you some tests. And one of those tests including getting a CAT scan of her eye. And the CAT scan results come back, and it shows a massive tumor sitting in her head. Not just a small tumor, but a massive tumor. She says, listen, you need surgery immediately. I don't know if this is cancer. It probably isn't. This tumor sitting inside of your head has gotten so big it is now compressing the optic nerve that controls the vision in your eye. We need to get you into surgery. And the eye doctor said, hey, did you ever have any CAT scans or x-rays before this? She said, yeah, I was in a car accident about 9 months earlier, and they took x-rays and they did a CAT scan. She said, they did a CAT scan? And what did they see? She said, it was normal. So this eye doctor went ahead and got the copy of the CAT scan results as well as the actual CAT scan. And she's looking at the CAT scan done 9 months earlier, which is when she was in the emergency room after the accident, and now, 9 months later, to look at the difference. And the differences were remarkable. 9 months earlier, the CAT scan did in fact show the tumor, but the tumor was small and had not yet affected this patient's optic nerve. Now, 9 months, the tumor had a chance to grow. It turned out this was a space-occupying tumor. It was not cancerous. They call it a benign tumor. And now, what happens when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger? Well, there's no place for it to go, so it puts pressure on the surrounding structures. And those structures, in this case, involved the optic nerve that controlled this patient's vision. Because so much time had gone by without this patient getting any treatment to remove the tumor and remove the pressure off the optic nerve, this patient lost total vision in her eye. She was blind. Why? Why did she go blind? And that was the question she asked me when she came to me. Why am I blind? I don't understand. My eye doctor told me that I had a CAT scan that showed this massive tumor recently, but then she also got my CAT scan from 9 months earlier, and it showed that the tumor was really small, and that they correctly recognized that I had a tumor. I said, didn't anybody tell you? She said, no. Didn't the emergency room doctor tell you that? No, he didn't tell me I had a tumor. He said it was normal. Normal? That's weird. And nobody notified you from the hospital in 9 months that there was a tumor sitting inside your head? He said, no. This was unbelievable. It turned out, and my medical experts confirmed the fact, that they recognized the tumor. The radiologist was correct. Yes, he sees the tumor. Anybody, you don't need to be a doctor to see this tumor sitting in the patient's brain. It was clearly abnormal. But the problem was, he did not communicate that information to the emergency room doctor. He didn't communicate it to anybody. He didn't communicate it to the patient. They dropped the ball. And because of that, this patient didn't get the surgery that she needed to go in and remove the tumor, or at least most of it, so it no longer was encroaching and impinging on that optic nerve. And had that been done, my experts confirmed that this patient never, ever would have lost her eyesight. And this was a relatively young woman. And here she is going about her daily business. Had it not been for that car accident, she never would have known she had this tumor going on in her brain, except for 9 months later when her vision would have gone bad. But because of that accident, and because the hospital actually undertook to treat her and to evaluate her, they had an obligation to correctly recognize and diagnose and communicate that information to the patient. And unfortunately for her, they failed to do that. They clearly violated the basic standards of medical care. And as a result, this patient lost vision in her eye. And I share this story with you to show you one example of this beautiful woman who lost her vision and now turned to me and said, "Can you help me, please? I lost my eyesight. I don't know why." And through the help of our medical experts and piecing together all the information about what happened, I was able to help this woman. But I have to tell you something else, and this is important. You would think that this was clear-cut. You would think that it's black and white. You would think that once the doctor's attorney and the hospital's attorney recognized that they failed to tell the patient about this, that they would turn around and say, "Okay, you're right. How much do you need to settle this case?" That's not what happened. Instead, they fought this tooth and nail. They fought this every single step of the way. We said day, they said night. We said we were right, they said we were wrong. We said they violated the standard of care, they said no, we didn't. This case did not get resolved until we actually went to pick a jury almost 3 years from the date that we started this lawsuit. How outrageous is that? So this woman didn't get justice, didn't get full compensation for the injuries, for the harms, for the loss of her vision, until almost 3 years later, when now we were forced to go out and pick a jury to start her trial. Only at that point did the defense recognize, you know what, we can't defend this case. We have no defense. And we can't go in front of a jury and make that argument that, hey, we did everything right. Because the reality was that they didn't. So I share this story with you just to show you one woman who underwent this treatment, who put her trust in the hospital for doing what was right, and she believed that they told her the truth, when in reality, the doctors failed to communicate that information. That was just one woman I was able to help during the course of my legal career. Let me share with you another one. Now, this one involves a young woman as well with 2 young children. She had been going to her gynecologist in the Bronx, and she went for a routine GYN checkup. And as part of that checkup, she went for a pap smear. And the pap smear came back as abnormal. And the doctor said, you know what, I want you to come back in a few months, and then we'll go ahead and repeat the pap smear. So now she comes back a few months later. The gynecologist tells her, listen, the pap smear came back as being abnormal. It came back as showing that there are cancerous cells or precancerous cells. And the only option you have right now is to have a hysterectomy. We need to remove your uterus because if you don't, what will happen is those precancerous cells will turn into cancer, which will then spread throughout your body, and you will die within a few short years. You don't want that to happen to you and your young kids, do you? You want to be around for years to come, isn't that right? And this young woman said, of course I do. Now, she trusted her gynecologist. She had put her faith into his hands, into his knowledge. And she had been going to him for many years, and she had no reason to distrust him. So she went ahead and scheduled the surgery. She has the surgery. A few weeks later, she goes back for follow-up to check on her incision and to get the results of the biopsy, the tissue samples that were taken during the course of surgery. So he tells her, everything looks fine, your incision looks great. By the way, you don't have any cancer. Congratulations, that's wonderful. Now you can move on with your life. Now, this young woman wanted to have more children, not immediately, but in the future she wanted to have more kids. Now, because her uterus was taken out, she couldn't have any more kids. And she stopped for a second. She said, what do you mean I don't have cancer? Well, the results came back and it doesn't show cancer anywhere. She said, what do you mean I don't have cancer anywhere? You told me that I had these cancerous cells and also these precancerous cells, that if I didn't have this surgery immediately, there's a good chance the cancer would spread throughout my body and I would die within a few years. What do you mean? And now the doctor began to give her lots of different excuses, lots of different explanations about why she did not have cancer in her uterus. She didn't have cancer in her ovaries. She didn't have cancer in her cervix. There was no cancerous cells anywhere. So she didn't understand. And the explanations she was getting from her gynecologist made no sense whatsoever. It was just one excuse after another after another. The doctor never turned around and said, listen, I accept responsibility. Here's really what happened. Here's the fact that you have no cancer. We never should have taken your uterus out to begin with. He never mentioned that at all. So now she didn't understand. That prompted her to come to me and said, Mr. Oginski, I don't understand. This doctor told me I had to have my uterus taken out, but after it was taken out, there was no cancer anywhere. There were no cancerous cells. There were no precancerous cells. Why did I have to have the surgery? I said, let me check on that. I obtained her medical records. I had them reviewed by one gynecologist. I had them reviewed by another world-famous gynecologist. I had them reviewed by someone else. And they all came back to me confirming the fact that this patient never, ever should have had a hysterectomy. There was no need for it. There was no reason for this patient to undergo surgery at all. You know why? Because she didn't have cancer. She didn't have precancerous cells. What she had was an abnormal pap smear that required a repeat pap smear, which is exactly what the gynecologist did. So that we give him credit for. But then, after those abnormal results came back, the next step was not to go to a hysterectomy. The next step was to do a different GYN procedure. Had he done that other procedure, that less invasive procedure, they would have recognized that there were no cancerous cells, that there was no cancerous tissue in the cervix or in the uterus. And that would have been the end of it. And she would have been told to come back and follow up in a year and now have the same test to see whether there was any change, to see whether there was any ongoing problem. That's exactly what they should have done. But instead, what happened? No, no, no. She needed a hysterectomy. That's what he said. She needed to go ahead and have the surgery, otherwise she'd be dead within 2 years. So again, you would think that when we have all of these experts who confirm that the doctor violated the basic standards of medical care, who turns around and says, yes, you need this surgery, and now you destroy this patient's opportunity to ever have kids again because you jumped the gun and didn't do the intervening GYN tests needed to monitor her, you would think that they'd say, okay, you're right, we screwed up. Well, go ahead, tell me how much you need to settle this case. That's not what happened here. Instead, They fought us tooth and nail. Not only did my client have to suffer the fact that she had her uterus removed and can no longer have children, but now when she brought a lawsuit against the doctor who caused all these problems, they turned around and said, sorry, we don't believe you. We did nothing wrong. And guess what? Whatever we did didn't cause or contribute to your injuries. And they said, hey, you didn't really want children anyway. You have 2 kids, they're fine and healthy. You don't need more anyway. That was the argument they were prepared to make at the time of trial. They refused to negotiate. They refused to settle this case. So what did we do? We had to try the case in Bronx County Supreme Court. And what happened here? We put on our witnesses. I put on my client, the injured patient. I put on her husband. I put on our medical expert. I put on other witnesses to talk about the problem she was having, the fact that she underwent the surgery. I put on all of the testimony, all of the evidence that we needed in order to show that we were more likely right than wrong and entitled to a verdict in our favor. And after putting on all of our testimony, at that point, we rested, which means that we put on everything that we need. Now it's the defense's opportunity to put on whatever witnesses they believe will go ahead and show that they have a valid defense. And here's what happened. During the lunch break, between the time that I rested our case, the defense lawyer came over to me and said, hey, Gerry, can we talk? And at that point, that was the only time, that was the first time in years that they had ever approached me and said, listen, we think we should settle this case. I said, now? Now, after all these years, you want to come to me and settle this case? I don't know if my client's going to want to do it at this point. You've taken up 3 years, 2.5 years of her time. And now she's furious that you have refused to acknowledge and accept responsibility. So I had to go and talk to my client and to present her with their offer. The next story I want to share with you involved a gentleman who was mugged on a Brooklyn street. He was walking down the street one day where he gets mugged. And if that wasn't bad enough, he also got hit in the face, causing him to fracture his entire orbit. Now, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the muscle that controls eye movement left to right somehow got trapped in the fragment of the fracture. So now in the emergency room, they're looking at him, and if he covered his good eye, he still could see perfectly out of the eye that now was had the trapped muscle. The problem was this eye was now looking outward. So it looked really weird. He's got one eye pointing straight at you and the other eye pointing straight to the side. So they said, listen, we can't do this in the emergency room. We suggest you go to your eye doctor to go ahead, get this evaluated and treated. So that's exactly what he did. He went to an ophthalmologist in Brooklyn, somebody who was on his healthcare plan. And she said to him, okay, I see the problem. We're going to go in and do surgery to fix the fractures, as well as remove the muscle so that now you'll be able to have normal vision. Now, he had normal vision. It just was trapped, the muscle was trapped, pointing his eye out in the wrong direction. And the goal here was to take that muscle out of the fragments of the fracture, allow it to return to normal, and then fix the fracture. And she tells him, listen, I've done this many times before. I know how to do it, no problem. So he believes her. He has no reason to distrust her, and he agrees to have the surgery. The surgery, during the course of surgery, what happens is she removes the muscle from the orbital fragments and now recognizes that he still has mobility and has the ability to move that eye left and right. And she tests it during surgery. That's no problem. You know the story Humpty Dumpty and all the people put things back together again? Well, that's exactly what she was doing. She was trying to piece together the bone fragments and hold it together with something called the titanium implant. And now you have a plate, a titanium plate with screws, and now you screw it in to attach it to the bone, and the bone will ultimately heal. So you've got titanium screws, a titanium plate, and you've got all these different bone fragments. And the goal is to tie them all together so now it heals up nicely, and now there's no problem whatsoever. And that's what she does, or at least that's what she tries to do. And she thinks she did it. She closes him up, puts a patch over his eye, and says, I'll be back to see you tomorrow. Well, now it's the next day. She comes back, takes the patch off, and says, okay, what do you see? He says, did you take the patch off? She said, what do you mean? He said, I took the patch off. He says, I can't see anything. She said, what do you mean you can't see anything? Can you see this? No. What are you doing? I can't see. With my good eye, I can see what you're doing. If I cover that, I can't see anything. I can't see light. I can't see dark. I can't see shapes. I can't see anything. It's black. She says, I'll be right back. Now she's getting frantic. She's like, how could that be? He had excellent vision before. She comes back into his room and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get you a CAT scan immediately. I'm going to get an X-ray as well. I want to see what's going on. So he has these tests done immediately, and now she's looking at the results with the radiologist. And she's looking at these results and comes back into him and says, okay, I need to get you back into surgery right now. He says, why? He says, because I'm going to try and move some things around. I think that'll solve the problem. And at this point he says, okay, do whatever you have to do. So she takes him back into surgery, and now what does she do? She takes the screws out of that titanium implant and now begins to move it and reposition it. And then she puts the screws back in, she closes everything up, and again double checks to make sure he's got mobility in his eye. Remember the first time it got stuck in the orbital fragments of bone and he couldn't move it, but he still had good vision? So now she checks mobility again, and it's fine. She repositions this plate, puts the screws into now a different position, closes them up, puts a patch over his eye, and says, I'll see you back tomorrow. She comes back tomorrow, sits in front of him, takes the patch off his eye, covers his good eye, and says, what do you see? And he says, nothing. And he says, what did you do? What did you do to me? She says, I'll be right back. And she goes to check her records, comes back in, does her test, takes her ophthalmoscope out, and is looking inside of his eye, and makes some excuse and says, oh, this is inflamed, let's give it time to come down. Now I'll give you some eye drops, some steroid drops to reduce the inflammation, and that should help. Help? I can't see a damn thing. What did you do? Days turn into weeks, turn into months. This man never gets his vision back. He never, ever gets any vision back. This man is blind. He goes to one specialist and another specialist and another one. And you know what they all say? Why are you here? You're blind in that eye. I can't do anything to fix it. And he says, what do you mean I'm blind? I had perfect vision. I had excellent vision. The only problem was that my muscle was trapped in the bone. She was supposed to take it out and allow my eye to move. Not a single doctor gave him an answer. He kept getting excuses from his eye doctor who did the surgery. He wouldn't get a straight answer from any of the experts that he went to afterwards that she had referred him to for further evaluation. Finally, he sees a neuro-ophthalmologist who says, you're blind, your optic nerve is dead. There's nothing I can do. That prompted him to come to me and say, Mr. Oginski, you have to help me. I don't understand. My doctor isn't giving me a straight answer. The other doctors that she sent me to aren't giving me straight answers. And I'm left with no vision in my eye. Can you please help me? And I said I'd be happy to. I went ahead and obtained all the medical records. I had a general ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, review the records. I had a neuro-ophthalmologist review the records. My neuro-ophthalmologist recognized the problem right away. It was actually an MRI that the patient had after the surgery, not a CAT scan, as I said earlier. And now he's looking at the MRI that was taken immediately after the first surgery. And you know what it showed? The implant, this titanium implant that was designed to hold the fractures, the bone fragments in place, that was put in incorrectly. Where was it put in? How was it put in incorrectly? The answer was revealed right in the imaging study. It showed that it cut and transected the nerve for the eye. The nerve is the optic nerve that goes from the brain to the eye. And if there's pressure put on that nerve and the blood supply is cut off, the patient will go blind. If you take a scissor and cut it, now there's no communication between the brain and the eye. The patient will go blind. If you cut it, transect it with a foreign object like a titanium implant, the patient will go blind, which is exactly what happened in this case. In this case, the patient's eye doctor who was doing the surgery transected and cut this patient's optic nerve when she put in that implant and now screwed it down in to hold the bone fragments. And the problem was she didn't even recognize where the optic nerve was. She didn't even recognize that this plate had cut off the optic nerve, not just cut it off, but cut it apart. So now there's no longer any communication. And the other key issue was that when she apparently is reading this MRI, she didn't even recognize Or maybe she did. Maybe she did and she was trying to do something to correct the problem. But now it's a day later. You cannot fix that problem. You can't put the pieces together again and hope that the patient will now see. Once it's cut, patient's vision is gone. So even though she attempted to go back in and tried to manipulate that implant away from the optic nerve, the reality was his vision was over. His vision was gone. All because she violated the basic standards of medical care. She didn't understand the anatomy to recognize where the optic nerve was. She didn't have the sense to understand that this was in an area she never should have put it in, or to at least have been careful to recognize where this was, to identify the optic nerve, to make sure it was nowhere near where this implant was going. And her attempt to try and fix that a day later was a waste of time. Her attempt to go in and explain to the patient that these things happen. No, they don't happen like that. They happen if you're careless. They happen if you violate the basic standards of medical care. They happen if you tell the patient you've done this procedure many times, when in fact she revealed to me during her pre-trial question and answer session that she had only done this 5 times in the course of her 30-year career. 5 times! Had the patient known that, he said he would have gone to a specialist. And in fact, our neuro-ophthalmologist, our expert, said he does this every single week. He does this type of surgery. He does this every single month. You want somebody who's done this hundreds and hundreds of times over their career. That's what should have been done. That's who he should have been sent to. This ophthalmologist should have recognized her limitations and immediately sent this patient to a specialist such as a neuro-ophthalmologist who does these types of procedures, these corrective procedures, all the time. Had that been done with almost 100% certainty, according to my neuro-ophthalmologist, this patient never would have lost vision in his eye. But all because this eye doctor violated the basic standards of medical care and refused to send the patient out to a specialist to have this done, now he has to spend the rest of his life with no vision in his eye. So I was privileged, and I owe a debt of gratitude to my client for the opportunity to help him obtain compensation, obtain money for all the harms and losses and damages that he incurred because of this doctor's carelessness. So why do I share all this great information with you while my neighbor is doing his lawn on Independence Day? I share it with you just to give you an inside look at how grateful I am for the opportunity to help these injured patients with their problems, the opportunity to help other people in need. And as always, if you find yourself in a situation where something happened to you through carelessness, a doctor or hospital staff, that occurred here in New York, and now you have questions about your matter and you have not yet started a lawsuit, what I invite you to do is pick up the phone and call me. I can answer your legal questions. You know, this is something I do every single day, and I'd love to talk to you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at Oginski-law.com. Well, that's it for today's day. I hope you have a wonderful Independence Day, July 4th weekend. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.